Introduce somatic methodology, and Richard Strozzi Heckler was the man who founded this methodology. So today we have Pete Hamill. He is a consultant and a facilitator and a coach. He has a background in leadership and organizational development. He's written a book on embodied leadership. He's worked with many organizations. He's senior faculty, the Strozzi Institute.
I guess what I'd like to start off is with the question, have you ever had the experience? It's the experience of knowing that you should do something, but somehow being unable to do it. Knowing that you should say no to somebody and being unable to do it. Or sitting around at the end of one of those meetings where somebody has to take on the piece of work that nobody else wants to do, and knowing that you shouldn't say anything, but somehow finding yourself taking the piece of work on. Or knowing that, it could be as simple as knowing that actually, you should be going to the gym, or you should be doing something else, and somehow being unable to do it. Being inhibited in some way to be able to take the action that you know you want to take, that you know you should take, and the knowing of that doesn't seem to make a lot of difference to your ability to take the action. We all have times where knowing what we should or could do or what we would do is not enough to being able to take the action. There's a difference between knowing, that cognitive knowing, and the ability to take action in the world. So that's essentially the core aspect of this somatic work, is how do we accelerate that move from all these things I know I could, should, would do, to how do I actually start to do them consistently and when under pressure. Our definition of learning is that we've learned how to do something we were previously unable to do, and that we can do it consistently and under pressure. And the embodied work is about producing that learning. And that's the journey that I wanted to outline for you today, that I want to take you through and give you a bit of a sense of what we mean by that. What stops us from being able to take the action that we know we should do in any particular situation? What is it that prevents us from being able to do something inside of those situations? And so how do we understand what's getting in the way as a starting point to doing something different? So part of what we do inside of this work is that we start to look at how have we been shaped as a human being into what is normal, what is comfortable, what is acceptable for us. And the combination of all those things that we have been habituated into is our personality. What happens in the moment is viscerally we're freaking out about the fact that there's a conflict emerging next to us, and we're really not very good at handling conflict. So we're doing whatever we habitually do with conflict. And then afterwards we make up the reason why. And we can even know that we need to deal with conflict better. We can know that we should be doing something differently, and yet be utterly unable in the moment to do anything different, because of the sheer level of visceral discomfort that this produces in us. And we all have these somatic markers. The best way of describing it is if I ask you to think back to an embarrassing situation that you were in at some point in your life. And if you bring that to mind, what you'll notice is that it doesn't just come to mind as a cognitive memory. Actually, the entire emotions of it start to come back to be present with you. That's the piece that's playing inside of us that says this isn't safe. Now, in evolutionary terms, this is something that we evolved to do as kind of like a defense mechanism. It was in the somatic markers that are embedded inside of us guide us in our responses. They hold us in a particular pattern of behavior, which is comfortable and normal, by playing that kind of discomfort, that visceral discomfort, that historic emotion, which tells us you're not safe, make yourself comfortable. So the starting point of our work is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, being aware of that and being with it rather than running away from it into our habitual responses. How do we start to center ourselves, which is the first practice of this work, and we'll have a choice about the actions that we take. That's the starting point of this work, is to start to interrupt that visceral discomfort, to start to interrupt that compulsive response that we have learned over time, and to get to a place where we can start to choose something different. And so the journey of this work is we start off by getting comfortable with the emotions, but then he had to learn how to be empathetic with people. So it's a practice. This work is based upon the idea that you have to practice to get good at anything. Leadership seems to be this really strange area that we've decided that we can learn from books and PowerPoint slides. And part of our claim in this work is that no, you can't. It is not about what you are able to intellectually know. Therefore, as a performance art, it requires practice. The essence of this work is that we first need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable so that we can make a choice, but we then need to start practicing a different way of being in the world. And that will be our second claim. You are what you're practicing. You know, our personality is the sum of the things that we have collectively practiced, actually. The question then becomes, is what you're practicing aligned with what you care about? You're always practicing something, and those collection of practices is who you are. They represent who you are in the world, your personality, your identity, how other people see you and engage with you. What we're doing is transformative work. What we're doing is paying attention to what are the somatic markers that arise inside of us? How do we get to a place where we can consistently, habitually do something different that we currently can't do, and that we can do it under pressure? So that, for me, is kind of like a story about what this work is capable of producing. It's capable of moving somebody from a place of utter inability to engage effectively in a particular context or situation to being at a high level of mastery in that situation through practice. You know, you've got to do stuff that is difficult and uncomfortable, and that through that you can really learn to be masterful at something. And when I got to this work, I thought, wow, this feels honest. You know, it's going to involve being uncomfortable, and it's going to involve practice. That feels honest, and it's going to take time. Learn to be able to take up a different shape in life. Learn to be able to bring a different quality forward. And there's a question for us here, which is, how do we expect other people to hold us with dignity if we don't hold ourselves with dignity? So this is the domain of dignity. The next one we have is the domain of width, the next of the spatial dimensions we live in. And that's a real conversation in the organizational domain and the leadership domain. How do we hold boundaries? And there's a whole group of us who don't know how to do that. That's the domain of width. It's the social domain. It's the domain of relationship with other people and holding effective boundaries with other people. Finally, we have the domain of depth, the last of the spatial dimensions that we live in. And so in the domain of depth, what we notice is that, you know, as human beings, the majority of sense organs are on the front of our bodies. We have a tendency to orient towards the future as being ahead of us and the past as being behind us. And so that creates a way of relating to the world. And so inside of our work, we're continually practicing centering. How do we experience life and bring ourselves back repeatedly, consistently over time in order to be able to bring forth a different choice about what it is we want to bring to the world? We hold ourselves inside of practices that express who we are in the world. It does two things for us. It gives us an internal reality where certain things are possible for us and certain things are impossible for us. We're responding differently from conflict. Even if I know I want to respond differently to conflict, I can't. And it also gives us an identity in the world because other people are seeing it and responding to it. So we are visible. This is the scary bit, is that our histories are writ on our bodies. If you start paying attention, you'll see other people. You'll see their histories. You'll see the expression of who they are is alive and visible in their bodies. And so part of this work addresses that very directly. Part of it, in this work, we start to learn to be able to read other people. And we start to look at where are the places where we are incongruent to other people. Where are the places where we're not producing trust in our relationships with other people. And so a real part of this work, a real element of this work is starting to deepen our own awareness of how we are showing up in the world, how we are facing and experiencing the world, what our collective identity is in terms of what other people hold to be true about us. And how do we start to take ownership of that and start to look at how do we create an identity which produces the kind of leadership that we want to express in the world. And so the last thing in our centering process, which we get onto in the program, is we center around what we most care about as a leader or as a coach or a leader in our lives, whatever it is. What are we committed to? It comes back to a very pragmatic piece around what are you up to in the world? What do you care enough about to want to do some deep work that will allow you to move towards the future that you care about? So we've got to build that somatic awareness as part of understanding what we care about in order to then be able to move, be able to start to cultivate the self that will be able to deliver on what we care about. We also do this work with teams. And then we also do work at our organizational level where we start to look at what the organizational response is. So that's the essence of our work, is bridging that gap between things that I know I should do to how do I effectively do them under pressure at the individual team or organizational level. And we develop coaches who are able to bring that work to their clients. My experience of this course is that people come out of this course with clarity around what do I care about and what do I want to achieve in the world. And I now know that I have the capacity to get there and what are the practices that will sustain me and get me there.